Hi there and welcome back to my channel. I am going to be talking today about some of my favorite books to read for snowy days. Here in Denver, we've gotten a couple of nice snowstorms this winter, and one of my favorite things to do when I can is, of course, curl up with a book and a nice cup of tea and just really enjoy the cold weather outside. So I've come up with a few different categories of books that I want to talk about today. One is sinister snowy reads. So if you want something that's a little bit darker, a little bit more of a mystery. I'm also going to talk about some cozy snowy reads, some things that are a little bit warmer if you need to warm up from the cold weather, some romances in there as well. I'll talk about some nostalgic snowy reads. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some engrossing snowy reads. So if you want to really just shut out everything around you and dive into some reads that are really going to keep you entertained, I'll talk about some of those as well. So I've picked 4 books for each category, and I'm going to give a little bit of a rundown for each book so that you can find out if it's one that you might want to check out. A lot of these are backlist books, books that maybe are not necessarily super recent. Some of them are, but some of them are not. So you can definitely check some out, and hopefully there's some on this list that you haven't heard of, but that you think would be interesting. Now, I have 16 books on this list total, and I have notes on this pad here that I'm going to have to refer to a little bit throughout this video just to make sure I get all of the details right. One of the things I'm going to share is the date of publication, the author, so that these are easy to find. I'll definitely make sure and put the cover of the book up here in the video so that you can see these as I'm talking through them. And then I'm also going to talk about the page length so that you can understand if this is something that you might even want to be able to finish during your snowy day reading. So let's start first with the sinister books. These are 4 books that I thought would be fun if you're really into mysteries or you're looking for something that's a little bit darker on your snowy day. So the first one I want to start with is The Snowman by Jo Nesbø. Now, this is a Scandinavian thriller mystery author, and he has a character that in the English spelling of the name, it looks like Harry Hole, but I think it's pronounced Harry Hola. And this is a detective who is kind of gruff. He definitely has his vices, and The Snowman is the 7th book in this series. Now, I do think that you can read the books out of order if you want to, but if you're someone who likes to read the series in order, just note that this is the 7th book. And the general premise of this book is there is a killer that is killing women, or they're going missing on the first snow of the season. And to make things even a little bit more creepy, when the women go missing, a snowman is put up in the space where they went missing, like in their yard. So definitely kind of creeping you out if you're someone who likes snowmen and doesn't want to have them tainted for your future enjoyment. This might be a book that you don't want to check out, but I really enjoy this series. I found it to be really engrossing. I like the character development over time. It's a great kind of police procedural if you're interested in that kind of book as well. So that's The Snowman by Jo Nesbø. The next book on my list is called I Am Still Alive by Kate Alice Marshall. And this is a young adult novel. So if you're looking for something that has kind of some thriller pacing, but is maybe a little bit tamer than something like The Snowman, this could be a good fit. The main character in this book is Jess, and Jess is visiting her father in the Canadian wilderness after she is in a car accident and her mother is killed. And so she is now going into the custody of her father. He kind of lives in the middle of nowhere in the woods. And she was also injured in that car accident, and she goes to live with him. Now, this is not a spoiler alert, but basically what happens is something happens in kind of the early part of the book where the cabin burns down, and she is having to survive in the wilderness and in the snow in the Canadian wilderness. And there's some kind of dangerous people who are coming after her. So I won't give away too much more than that, but it's a great kind of like survivalist story. And I really was just turning the pages on this one. I think I might have read this in 1 or 2 sittings. I really enjoyed it. And there's a lot of kind of fun elements of just how she's using the land, how she's using skills that she learned from her father to survive in this particular environment. So that book is from 2018, 331 pages. And I just realized The Snowman I didn't mention is from 2011, 383 pages. The next book that I want to talk about in this kind of sinister, snowy day category is Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. Now, this is a book that is more recent. It is from 2020, about a little less than 250 pages. And the general premise of this book is you have a family that rented a house, kind of like a B&B style, and they go away for the weekend outside of the city of New York City. And in the middle of the night of their first night staying in this house, the original owners of the house, which is kind of an older Black couple, come banging on the door, and they say that there's a blackout in the city and they're concerned about their safety. And so they've come home. They had planned to be away and kind of rent out the house, but then they're coming back. And the family that is staying in the house is having to kind of decide what to do. They end up letting this couple back in. And then you see this kind of proceeding from there. Now, I don't want to give too much away in this particular story either, but basically you are left wondering from very early in the book, what is going on with this blackout? Is it something that is more sinister? Is it something that is man-made? Is it something that is resulting from kind of a larger societal issue? Like we're not quite sure what's happening with it. And so that is something that kind of unravels throughout the book. Now, I will say that if I remember correctly when I read this book, this is one of those books that I don't feel like has an ending where everything is kind of tied up really tightly in a bow. So if you're someone who really doesn't like, an ending that's a little bit more open-ended or that doesn't kind of wrap everything up, this might not be the book for you. But if you do like books where you get to have kind of a lot of like social issues that you might want to be thinking about, this is a book that's certainly about race relations. It's a book about family. It's a book about kind of societal challenges. This could definitely be something that you might want to pick up. Okay, so the fourth book in this category of sinister snowy day books that I want to talk about is The Witch Elm by Tana French. Now, this is a book from 2019. It is the longest book on this particular list at 509 pages. And Tana French has a mystery series that she writes that is very well known, but she also has, and it's called the Dublin Murder Squad series. But this is a book that is a standalone. So if you want to try out Tana French and not engage in her series, this would be a great one to pick up. The Witch Elm is, the basic premise of this book is you have the main character, Toby, who is, has his life disrupted when he interrupts some robbers who are in his apartment, and he ends up getting beaten up by them. And this causes a kind of brain injury for him that makes him a pretty unreliable narrator throughout this entire book. So that's something to keep in mind. And if you like unreliable narrators, this would be a great book to check out. And so because Toby is kind of recovering from the situation, he goes back to his kind of ancestral home and takes care of his uncle who happens to be not well. And so he's going back to live with him. And while he goes back to this home, there is a skull that is found in a tree in the backyard, and the mystery kind of unravels from there. The reason that I picked this book for a snowy day book that I thought would be a great fit is it has wonderful ambiance. It's pretty dark. I think it has kind of a nice, slow, psychological thriller pacing. If you want to kind of just really dig into something that gives you a lot to think about, that it would be difficult for you to kind of figure out what's going on, and you have to kind of let it unravel and see what's happening within this particular storyline. It's a great fit for cuddling in and really, if you want to read like multiple hundreds of pages of a book, this is one that I would highly recommend. All right, so let me move on to the next category of books that I want to talk about. I picked out some nostalgic reads that I thought would be really fun for a snowy day. Now, some of these are more children's fiction or young adult fiction, and so they're going to be a little bit shorter. So if you're looking for something that you want to read in a shorter period of time, this would potentially be a good fit for you to check out. Now, the first one that I have on my list is an older book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This is a book that was originally published in 1970, less than 200 pages, and this is a well-known kind of Christian allegory story, but I think it also has, if you're not kind of religiously oriented, a lot of fun elements that tie in with a snowy day. So the general premise of this book is you have 4 siblings who are staying in a home, and one of the siblings comes to understand that when he goes into the wardrobe, it takes him into another kingdom. Now, one of the most fun characters I think in this book is a snow witch. And so if you're looking for something that is snow themed, you're going to find that in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Now, there is a much longer series that this ties into, but you could certainly read the first book as a standalone if you wanted to, just to get into the vibe of a snowy day. Now, the second book that I put on this list for nostalgic reads is Gary Paulsen's Hatchet. Now, this is a book from 1989, so definitely another nostalgic read for sure, and less than 200 pages. And the general premise of this book is you have a teenage boy, Brian, who is going to visit, I believe, his father. Also, I think this takes place in the Canadian wilderness, so you might see a theme here. But he ends up being in a plane crash that kills the pilot of the plane. And he crashes kind of in the middle of nowhere and has to figure out how to survive. And all he has with him is a hatchet. So this is definitely another kind of like wilderness-based storyline. I feel like when we have the elements going on outside, when it's cold, when it's blustery, when it's windy, when it's snowy, sometimes these are the most fun books that we can read. This is also part of a multi-book series. If you wanted to continue on, the second book in the series is called The River, where Brian actually returns to the site of what happens to him. And there's other books that follow up on his story as well. The third book that I put together on this list is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. And this is a book from 2003, roughly 370-ish pages. And it tells the story of Richard, who is kind of a businessman in London. And through a series of circumstances, he gets introduced to what is called the London underworld. And this is kind of a modern day fairy tale. What I really like about it is it's very whimsical. There's a lot of elements of the story that really showcase Neil Gaiman's storytelling experience and expertise. So if you're looking for something that's just kind of a nice romp in terms of a story, this would be a good one. I put this in the nostalgia category because I think that anything that's related to fairy tales, we don't necessarily always read as adults. And I think that Neverwhere is a perfect example of something that you could pick up on a snowy day and really get lost in the narrative. All right, the last book that I put in this subcategory of nostalgic reads for a snowy day is one of my favorites from my own childhood and adolescence, and that's The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle. This is a book that is also from many, many years ago, and it's less than 300 pages. The general premise of this is you have a young girl who's in her adolescence, and she is going on a ship passage. And while she's on this ship, there is a bit of a mutiny on board. And through a series of different circumstances, this young girl basically becomes a member of the crew and is trained as a member of the crew of this ship. Now, there is a range of different kind of relations here, power structures, gender dynamics that I think make this book a really fun read. But I think if you're looking for something that's kind of adventurous and can allow you to like sink into a story on your snowy day, this would be a great one for you to pick up. All right, let's move on to the cozy reads section. If you're looking for something that's a little bit warmer or something that can distract you from your snowy day, here are 4 books that I think could be a good fit for that. The first one is called The Bookish Life of Nina Hill by Abby Waxman. And this is a more recent book, 2019, about 350 pages. The general premise of this book is you have Nina, who is a bookseller. She works in a bookstore, and this takes place in California. A lot of sunny days happening in this book. And basically what happens is Nina finds out that the father that she never knew, and that was not identified by her mother, has passed away and has left her in his will. And this man happened to have a whole different family, and she automatically gets kind of added into this family structure, and all of a sudden has all of these people that she's related to that she had no idea that she was related to before. This is a bit of a romance as well. You see Nina Hill kind of coming out of her shell a little bit, meeting people in this family, developing a bit of a relationship. It's a really warm story with a lot of connections to reading and books if that's something that is up your alley. The next book that I put on this list is called Beach Read by Emily Henry, and it is also a recent 2020 book, about 360 pages. And this tells the story of January and Augustus. They are 2 writers who work on kind of separate genres, but they know each other from when they were in school. January is a romance writer, and Augustus is kind of a literary novelist. and they run into each other in a small town. Both of them are feeling kind of stale with their writing, and so they decide to switch genres. Augustus will write a romance, and January will write a literary novel. Now they are living next to each other in these beach houses, hence the name of the book, and of course a romance begins to ensue. I highly recommend this one. It was one that I think I read in, again, 1 or 2 sittings, really enjoyed it, and it's a great beach read if you want to have a beach read setting in the middle of your winter snowy day. The third book that I put on this kind of cozy warm list is a book called A Country Year by Sue Hubble. This is a memoir that is about a woman who has ended a 30-year marriage and ends up moving to a farm in the Ozarks, and then talks about kind of the seasonality of her life on this farm. So of course, winter is part of what she talks about in this year-long memoir that she's writing, but it's really a wonderful kind of exploration of nature and different elements of what she's learning about herself and the environment that she's living in. This was a book that I found to be really fascinating. It's very different from the life that I live, and I always love diving into books that tell me about the experiences of other people. This is a book from 1999, less than 250 pages if you want something a little bit shorter for your snowy day read. And then the last book that I put on my list for this particular category is Britt Was Here by Fredrik Backman. This is a little bit more of a recent novel as well, 2016, 325 pages. And this tells the story of Britt Marie, who happens to be a woman who feels from the beginning of the book a little bit uptight. She's very organized, she likes to have control of things, and she ends up coming into a new small town and becoming kind of connected to the sports team in that small town and some of the youth of that town. There's a little bit of a mystery of something that's happening with Britt Marie's marriage that we don't really fully understand until the end of the book. And we're trying to figure out how this woman who's kind of very uptight and super organized and maybe a little bit too type A is going to start to warm up to this town. The voice of Fredrik Backman's novels is wonderful. He has a couple other ones that I've also really enjoyed, but Britt Was Here is definitely a cozy read for a winter day if you're looking to see someone kind of unthaw over the period of the novel. All right, so the last category I'm going to talk about for your snowy day reads is if you want books that are just utterly engrossing. If you want to lose yourself in your snowy day read to the point where your cup of tea or coffee or cocoa goes cold. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is one of my favorite books that I've read that I would put in kind of a general science fiction category. And it's a more recent read from 2021, a little shy of 500 pages. And this book follows our character Ryland, who wakes up in what we can think is kind of a spaceship situation, and he has no memory of why he is there. Pretty early on, we find out he is the only person in this spaceship, and then all kinds of information unravels throughout the story about what he is actually trying to accomplish in this spaceship, what happened to the rest of the crew of the spaceship, and there are some really fun surprises in this book along the way. I don't want to give away too much here because there are some twists and turns in this book that make it really fascinating. But I will say if you're interested in things like space travel, if you're interested in adventure stories, if you're interested in linguistics, science, music, all of these things would draw you into Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. The next book that I put on this list of utterly engrossing novels is The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. Now, this was the first Kristen Hanna book that I read, and I absolutely loved it. I ended up listening to it on audio, which I would also highly recommend. Basically, the storyline of this book is in the 1970s, there is a family made up of Ernst, Cora, and Lenny. Lenny is the daughter in this family. And Ernst decides that he wants to move his family to Alaska. And he's a little bit paranoid. He's come back from the war. He definitely has some kind of mental health challenges, maybe some PTSD. We're not entirely sure in the beginning of the book. And so he moves his family to Alaska. Now, there's a very small community where he moves, and there starts to be some kind of disruptions in this community. We start to see Ernst being a little bit more abusive to his family. And this is a book that took all kinds of twists and turns that I was not expecting. I feel like it ended up being a bit of like a historical fiction book. It ended up being a family drama. There was a little bit of a romance in there. There's a mystery element to it. All of these different layers of genres ended up being brought into this book, and there were all kinds of things that happened plot-wise that I was not expecting. I think I probably sat down and listened to this book on audio. Despite the fact that it was just shy of 500 pages, I probably sat and listened in a couple of settings. I loved speeding through this story. I loved the characters, and it was really fascinating to see how everything wrapped up in the very end. Now, that book is a 2018 novel and just shy of 450 pages. All right, the next book I want to talk about is a nonfiction book that I also thought was fascinating and incredibly engrossing. And this is called The Library Book by Susan Orlean. Now, this is a book that tells the story of a fire that happened in the 1980s in the Los Angeles Public Library. This is a fire that burned for hours and hours and ended up really destroying a majority of the collection that was in the area where the fire was taking place. Now, the story that Susan Orlean tells in this nonfiction book is trying to figure out who set this fire. What was the arsonist's motive? What was going on? And Susan Orlean pulls together all kinds of interesting facts and information about the LA area in this particular time period, about arson. So if you're looking for something that's engrossing and that will offer a different kind of warmth in terms of thinking about fire and arson, this is one that's really fascinating. And for someone who also loves books, I think this is a great nonfiction one to pick up. The library book is from 2018, a little over 300 pages. And then the last book I put into this engrossing category is a book called The Stranger in the Woods. And this is also another nonfiction book about a hermit that lived in Maine alone in the woods for 27 years. So this is a book about a 20-year-old man who decides in the 1980s to basically move to the backwoods of Maine and to survive off the land for 27 years. The person who tells this story is basically coming from like a journalist perspective. It's fascinating. We come to understand why this man was living in the woods. We also come to understand over time that he had kind of a relationship, and not always a positive one, with the local community because he was stealing from various houses of people who were vacationing in this community and caused a lot of fear in the community because people didn't know who he was. He was never seen, he was hidden away, and eventually he is caught, and we get to hear what happens in the aftermath of that situation. This is a book that also is set in kind of a rural setting. There are some definite winter scenes in this book as well. If you want to do a deeper dive into what I think is just a fascinating character study of this person living by himself in isolation for almost 30 years. The Stranger in the Woods is from 2017, a little less than 250 pages if you're looking for a bit of a shorter read on your snowy day. So I hope that you're able to find something in this list of 16 books that might be of interest to you as you're thinking about how you want to spend your next day huddled up inside. I hope you find some time to get cozy, have a nice cup of tea, coffee, cocoa, and have a wonderful read. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to subscribe for future videos, I welcome you to do that. You can also like this video by hitting that thumbs up. That helps other people to find this video in the future. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.